Hello, I'm Molly Murray, President and CEO of the Autoimmune Association, and I want to welcome you to Autoimmune Voices Threads of Hope, a podcast from the Autoimmune Association. With this podcast, we're raising awareness about autoimmune disease, sharing powerful stories, and building a community of support. Each episode, we dive into topics that matter most to the autoimmune community and provide information, insights, and hope. Today, we're taking a look at clinical trials, studies that test new ways to prevent, diagnose, and treat disease. For people living with autoimmune conditions, understanding clinical trials is important. Why? Because they help bring forward better treatments and ultimately hope for cures. We'll explore what they are, how they work, and what it's like to participate. I'm joined today by two guests who bring unique perspectives to the table. With us today is Dr. Adam Schiffenbauer, a physician scientist at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and Alana Snowden, who brings the patient perspective. What makes her story unique is that she didn't just happen into a clinical trial. She actively researched her options, found Dr. Schiffenbauer's study, and made the decision to join. So we have both the researcher and the patient here with us today. So let's get right to it. Dr. Schiffenbauer, I'm going to start with you. Can you please introduce yourself and describe your role at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences?
Sure. I'm Dr. Schiffenbauer, and I'm a physician researcher. It's really a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk with all of you today. I wear a lot of hats here. I'm an adult rheumatologist, managing adult patients, and I also work as a physician scientist. And in those roles, I do a range of activities, clinical activities like examining patients, coming up with treatment plans, and that's combined with my research activities that range from designing research studies to ensuring they're carried out correctly, to helping write and present those findings to a variety of audiences, both scientific audiences and patient and lay audiences. We go through things.
Wonderful. Thank you for that background. And Alana, how about you? Can you introduce yourself as well and share a little bit about your background?
Hi, I'm Alana Snowden, and I'm a patient advocate for the Autoimmune Association. And I'm also a hairdresser of 30 years. So this is a great opportunity, and thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful to have you both here. Super excited for this conversation. I think all of us at the Autoimmune Association have been. So let's just dive right in here. Dr. Schiffenbauer, to level set for today's discussion and for listeners who may not be aware, can you describe at a high level what a clinical trial is? Describe the variety of clinical trials and the difference between an observational and an interventional study.
Sure. So there are lots of different clinical trials, since different questions require different ways to answer them. And one of the biggest differences is between interventional and non-interventional trials, as you brought up. So in an interventional trial, something is done to try and change a participant's health. This can be giving them a medication, which is what we often think about. It can be trying a new device, if somebody gets a pacemaker or new crutches, but it can also be changing their diet or teaching them a particular exercise routine. And broadly, we talk about these falling into categories such as prevention trials, so trying to prevent disease, screening trials, trying to look for disease, diagnostic trials, so what testing can we do, the treatment trials, which I think is what most people think of when they think of a clinical trial, behavioral trials, and then quality of life trials, studies looking to see if we can make people feel better or enjoy themselves more. And these studies are usually designed to help us learn if something can improve people's health. A non-interventional study is focused on collecting information. This can be filling out a survey about how disease impacts a participant, to collecting blood samples, maybe collecting other types of samples like a skin biopsy, or even collecting like fitness information from someone's smart device. And this information, sometimes we collect it at one time point, sometimes we collect it at multiple time points from a participant. And we can look at what happened previously for them. So what did you do in the past, as well as going forward. So people enroll and we study and we say, every couple of months, we want to hear from you about what's going on in these things. And these studies really are focused on letting us learn what causes disease, what the prognosis of disease may be. And they're important for being able to design new treatments and really answer patients' questions about what to expect. And I think underrated but important in there is understanding what makes an illness better or worse from a patient perspective. What does better or worse really mean for them?
Okay, wonderful. I appreciate you kind of clarifying the differences there and the variety, kind of at a high level. Can you explain why they're so important in medical research?
Yes. So clinical trials are really essential for answering important questions about health conditions. And this is where we answer questions like what causes disease, how best to treat or prevent them, and what patients can expect over time. There's lots that we can learn from other types of studies, from our benchtop science, cellular models, and other things. But to really understand how things impact people, we need people to be involved in those studies and to have them be part of it. You can't teach a mouse to watch a TV show or an instructional video and see what happens to it. There are things that we need people to be involved with as we do them.
Right, right. So the human side matters here, right? Thank you for that. And Alana, as a patient, your perspective is a little bit different. I'm hoping you can share with us what kind of a clinical trial you participated in. Dr. Schiffenbauer gave us the variety that exists there and what they do, and how you came to be involved in Dr. Schiffenbauer's study.
Sure. I believe I was non-interventional and diagnostic with my trial. And how this all got started, a friend of mine connected me with the Autoimmune Association and another patient advocate by the name of Sade Mallory. And it was beautiful because it was a shared experience. And she shared with me her clinical trial with the National Institute of Health. And from that point, I was like, okay, someone hears me, someone understands me. And from that, she was like, well, do you mind if I connect you with my coordinator from NIH? I said, absolutely. Because doing it on my own and trying to research and pick out a clinical trial, and after this conversation, knowing that there's so many layers to get involved with clinical trial, I was completely out of my lane. So it was nice that I had that support from someone that was a part of the Autoimmune Association. And it went pretty fast. I had a great conversation with Dr. Schiffenbauer, and I was actually a perfect candidate for the trial that NIH and he was having.
Okay, that's great. Can you tell us? So you became aware of it. You talked to another patient advocate, Sade, who also participated in a trial, and were able to. She was able to share her experience as well. What was the one thing that made you, decide to consider participating?
Two major things. One, for me personally, was to be a part of something that one is a stigma in the Black community in the United States. And I was just like, we got to get past this. The second part was actually Dr. Schiffenbauer. I got to say, if you ever watched the movie, I forgot the name of it, with Robin Williams, and he was the doctor and he was really funny, and just Dr. Schiffenbauer, you were so warm, and it was like he was kind of funny, like my kind of humor. And I was like, I'm all in, because it was just the energy, that he had through the Zoom. And I don't even know if you know this, but that's what I felt. And that was that was the icing on the cake for me.
Kindness and humor goes a long way in this world, right?
It does.
Thanks, Elena. So kind of a follow-up to that question then, did you have any concerns before enrolling?
Oh yeah, because you don't know what you don't know, and a part of that was like the unknown of what it was going, what would happen, right? And so diving into something and you really just don't know. But I'm like, in my space, I'm like, I'm going to do it. And if anything, I'll walk away with a clear sense of knowledge of where I am with my autoimmune disease, and also how to move forward and advocate for myself a whole lot better with my doctors.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, I want to take a step back and talk about the phases of clinical trials. Based on the overview that you gave us, Dr. Schiffenbauer, it seems like there are differences that impact you as a clinician and researcher, and the patient as well. Dr. Schiffenbauer, can you tell us what are the typical phases? And related to that, what kinds of questions do different phases aim to answer?
Sure. So phases mean something particular. Usually, when we talk about clinical trials, and there are 4 phases. But even before we get to that level where we're talking about the phases, there's a lot of work and time that goes into developing the ideas that lead to those clinical trials. There's basic benchtop research that goes into understanding what interventions to try, what to know about them. Work to look at safety for those interventions, a lot of work outside of people before we get to a clinical trial that involves a person. So using different models and systems to try and understand how well things work and how safe they are. When we talk about phases of a study, we usually use a number 1 through 4 to talk about the phase. One's the earliest studies, and then they build upon each other to getting to a phase 4 study is sort of the one that happens last or the most advanced one. And as the numbers increase, so you go from 1 to 4, really the biggest thing that changes is the number of people that are receiving an intervention. So phase 1 study may be like 20 to 80 people, with a phase 3 trial being 1 to 2,000 people. But those vary a lot. So in our rare diseases, particularly in autoimmune disease, getting a trial that's 2,000 people may be very hard. There, a phase 3 trial may be much smaller to reflect what the study population is. And even some of these studies, phases can be combined in some studies because the numbers are low that we can pull from because they're not as common a disease. When we look at the questions, phase 1 usually is a very small group of participants, like I said, and it focuses on safety as its primary point, but also side effects of the medication and then the best dosing of the medication. And often phase 1 is done in healthy people. It's not even somebody who has the disease or illness in question. It's really focused on how safe is this, what happens. Phase 2 then is focused on, does the intervention work? But then the side effects in the population that has that disease. So now we're going to look at people who have whatever the disease or illness is that we're concerned in. How safe is it in them? And does it seem to have an effect? Phase 3 are the bigger studies. These are the ones where the goal really is, can we get this drug approved for use in the general population? Often they're comparing effectiveness. So is this treatment or intervention better than something else, whatever we normally are using or someone else is considering? Is this an improvement? And then phase 4 trials happen after a drug is approved, and they allow for more information to get gained about the safety and efficacy of an intervention. So even though we've given it to a lot of people potentially in a phase 3 study, when it gets to a phase 4, there's a lot more people. It's out in the public. It's used in different ways. Collecting that information that's usually done by companies and by the government helps to get new information out there, so we never stop learning about how that drug or intervention works and how best to use it.
Okay, that's really helpful, and I think from your description we can hear how well thought out these different phases are and how they build upon each other, to create a safe environment for participants. Alana, let's hear a little bit about the actual journey that you had with your clinical trial.
Okay.
What did your visit to the trial site involve?
Well, mine's I feel was unique. I actually stayed at NIH for like a week, so that was pretty cool. It involved, let me see, I wrote everything down because it was like a whole week of goodness. I had my blood taken. There was MRI scan, CT scan of my bones, and also it was another area, so a DEXA scan. I had EKG done. There was therapy. So I had another thing where they like checked out like the blood vessels under my nails. So I thought that was really unique. And then I got a chance to interact with some other doctors that were learning about the disease. And so they came into the room and we had many discussions. And I had 3 types of occupational, like it was like therapy, like a physical therapy, occupational therapy, A physiologist came. I went through that. And then the icing on the cake in between this was a clergy came in to speak with me during this. So it was a very holistic journey, and also the food was great.
That cannot be underestimated, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's helpful, and I appreciate your transparency there on kind of everything that was involved with that, down to your fingernails being looked at, right?
Yeah.
Was there any part of the process that surprised you? You did your research, you talked to Dr. Schiffenbauer before you came in, and obviously you talked to Sade, as you mentioned, but was there anything that you just didn't expect?
32 vials of blood being drawn all in one session. That was like huge for me. I did pass out, but and it was like early in the morning. So that probably was like the biggest like thing. I was telling everybody about my vampire experience.
Right, the things that you don't expect, right?
No,
But,
yeah.
it sounds like you handled it well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Schiffenbauer. Back to you. You mentioned this just a moment again about the different phases of a clinical trial and how safety is top priority, and certainly something that's a big consideration. Can you tell us how researchers determine whether a trial is safe to conduct?
Sure. So I think it's important. There are two things we look at in a trial when we talk about safety. So the first one is the safety of the intervention being done. Is the medication that we're giving safe? Is the exercise regimen we're giving somebody safe? Is the education we're giving them safe? And then the other part of it are the tests we do to learn about that. So is the blood draw safe? Is the biopsy where we get the tissue for studying the thing we want to look at safe? Is the EKG safe? So and we separate those out, and it's important about knowing whether if problems show up they're from whatever we're doing, the new intervention, versus the testing that's done to understand if that's helping or not and what problems it's causing. And we build the safety really through layers of information. So first, there's as much as we possibly can do in safety testing in ways before we even get near a person. Whatever the models are, animals, tissue, computer models now, all sorts of different ways to look at safety. We pull information from prior work and similar studies to ensure that we know everything there is about safety, and how to do things in the best way for these new techniques and ideas we're putting forward. And then we use a lot of people. There's knowledge to be gained from having different viewpoints, different individuals looking at something, people with different specialties, to try and put together the safest way to go about something, but then also what to look for. What are the things where we think there might be a blind spot that we have to pay attention to? For the study procedures, it's a little easier because often we have more information. But really, almost all the study procedures you can think of have some potential risk to them, whether it's filling out a survey that may make somebody feel sad or depressed as they reflect on something, a biopsy that comes with risks of injury, simply collecting personal information. And we talk about whether could be theft or people could steal information. And the researchers really weigh all of these risks. We have more of a host of information we can pull from about those risks, and particularly how to minimize them. And we do everything we can to minimize those. And we do that a lot by following common safety parameters, what other people have done, and protective standards. And there's a lot of work done to make sure those are set up so everything can be done across lots of studies in the best way. We have lots of levels of oversight. I think everyone's always impressed how many different levels of oversight over a clinical study there is, but it's never somebody coming in just saying, I'm going to do something. Before a patient gets to see a clinical study, it's gone through many levels of review, lots of different groups for different aspects of it, and those have gone on for other people continuing to review it. To make sure that it's done. And you may hear the IRB is probably the biggest one people talk about, the Internal Review Board, who are in charge of making sure the study is really done in a safe and ethical way, and making sure the risks and benefits are appropriate and that ratio makes sense for the study in question as it keeps going on, and updating it as we learn more.
Okay. Great to hear that every precaution is taken to make clinical trials safe. You're honest that you can't eliminate all risk, but certainly do everything that you can to make sure these trials are safe. And I think that's again important for anybody who's considering participating in a clinical trial. To build on that, how do researchers, before you even get into the clinical trial itself, how do you decide which treatments or strategies to test?
Sure. When we decide what to look at, there are lots of things we consider when designing studies. I think the biggest things we look at as researchers is to consider whether the trial addresses a meaningful question, whether it can be done safely, and whether it's practical to conduct. And we look for studies that hopefully can do all three at a very high level. When looking at different interventions that can be considered, we take into account a lot to figure out which one to try. Clearly, how successful it is going to be in changing the disease course and how much it can improve disease is very important. Everybody wants a trial for something that's going to make a big difference. We look at potential side effects and how likely an intervention is to be tolerated. And often that involves feedback from our patient partners about those side effects and how much they think it may impact them, because that's important to understand. What I think may be a big side effect may not be so important to a patient, or vice versa. And then we look at what's practical. So something that is a once-a-day pill that may be, we think, little less effective than something that's a 3-hour IV infusion every day. We may say that pill, patients are going to be much happier about that. More people are going to take it while we try that pill out first before we try that IV infusion. That's going to be much harder. But the goal really is always the same, which is to optimize that risk-benefit ratio. And unfortunately, when we design studies, we don't always have all the data we want to get that as precise as somebody might want in terms of understanding the exact risk and the exact benefit. But that's why we have the non-interventional studies. They give us that information that's needed to answer those questions about that risk-benefit ratio. And it's why we involve our patient partners and patient advocacy groups in doing this and understanding how important those different elements are. That treating somebody's itch, is that a big benefit? Is that a little benefit? How do they feel about that? What's the reasonable amount of risk to take on to be able to help that? And it's a conversation, and it's a conversation that keeps on going.
Okay, thank you. I think again, it just showcases what a rigorous process this all is, and the amount of thought that goes into even what's going to be studied in the first place. And I like that you share how you bring the patient voice in that to help assess what benefits and risks are. Appreciate that. I think Alana, coming back to you, I'd like to hear following your clinical trial. So you gave us an idea of what the experience itself was like. Mm-hmm. What kinds of assessments or check-ins were part of your participation, and how often were you in contact with the research team?
I was in contact with Dr. Schiffenbauer every day of the research. In addition to Dr. V, she came in to make sure that I was okay, throughout the process, because she was the one that took me through all of the documentation, the sign-offs before we got started. And it was a lot of paperwork. So she was very thorough. And even coming back, we had missed something after I left, and she's like, it was one little thing. So there's constant contact, not just with the research team, but also the nurses, just to make sure that I'm okay, I'm comfortable. And that was very comforting for me during the process. And we went through, with Dr. Schiffenbauer, we went through an overview, of what took place, what happened, any other questions he had throughout, and I had throughout that time. So there was constant communication throughout the entire my entire research process.
Okay. So never kind of a question outstanding. There was a constant feedback loop there, and getting the questions answered that maybe you needed along the way. Thanks for that, Alana. In this first part of our conversation, we've heard how clinical trials connect patients and researchers in powerful ways by building trust, breaking down stigma, and opening doors to understand immune disease from every angle.
Elena's story reminds us that participation isn't just about the science. It's about courage, connection, and hope. In the next part of our discussion, we'll look deeper at how clinical trials advance discovery from the data they generate to the lasting impact they have on patients, researchers, and the future of autoimmune care.